We are now live on the social medias. Good evening, YouTube and Facebook. Sean Hall, Director of Programming of Veterans Breakfast Club. We're going to be joined tonight by Christine Woods, author of My War, From Bismarck to Britain and Back. This is going to be the Veteran Stories with Pete Mecca tonight. So we're just chatting here in the green room before we get started here at 7 and let people in. Tina, thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's really fun to be here. I'm looking forward to this. I haven't done one of these before, so this will be something new for me.
Yeah, these are a lot of fun.
Zoom meetings, but not really many interviews, so to speak.
Yeah, they've been a lot of fun. We kind of run this like a TV show almost. We have music, we have intros, we got sponsors. You know, the only thing we don't have is commercial breaks, which is a good thing.
Interaction too. I mean, people may ask you questions during the interview. Sometimes they'll wait to the last, but if they want to, we allow it. It's sort of free rolling type thing. Okay.
Yeah. Well, sounds fun.
Well, imagine her first husband, since they nicknamed him Cash, since his last name was Register. He was glad to get rid of the nickname Pinky since he was in the military.
Not very grown up name. No.
Well, he flew a great aircraft, that Corsair. The Japanese call it Whistling Death.
Really?
Yes, it was a great aircraft, a great fighter. The F-4 Hellcat shot down most of them, but that Corsair was one heck of an airplane.
I think he flew the F-4 as well. That sounds familiar to me also.
Well, the F-4 was also the F-4 Corsair and the F-4 Hellcat.
Oh, so okay. See, I get all confused with my plane numbers.
Well, I was in the Air Force and I still do.
Oh, good. I don't feel too bad.
All right, so we're not on the air yet, are we, Sean?
Not well. We're live on social media.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome social media. Should be a good program tonight.
We'll get started in about 2 minutes. I'm going to get everything set up here on the back end. We'll have our music set.
Okay.
Tina, you're welcome to join us anytime.
Yeah.
This new. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Well, next month, I think, my guess, I haven't finalized everything yet. He was an Air Force pilot in Vietnam, and he was shot down and was POW in the Hanoi Hilton.
Oh gosh,
5 years, something like that. Great guy. This only give your name, rank, and serial number.
Yeah,
that's no more. Okay, you got to survive. God bless these guys. I lost a lot of good friends over the north, and some of them didn't come back. So anyway,
I'm sure you did.
So you're down there in Texas. God bless Texas.
God is frying Texas right now. We've already hit our 100-degree temps, and that normally doesn't happen until like the middle of June. And our spring, our spring has been totally robbed from us, and we have had no rain. I mean, it is brown and crumbly.
Brown and dry.
That is brutal.
And wind, it's big red fire alerts everywhere. And
all right, I'm gonna start the program, not to interrupt you. We'll let everybody in and get going. All right. Good evening.
Hi.
Everyone's joining a couple minutes past 7. It's a beautiful day here in Pittsburgh, so I see a lot of names popping in. I'm sure it's beautiful across the country where everybody's joining in from, so happy to have everybody joining us tonight. I'm going with a little stylish hip hop here, hip hop rock to start the program. I feel like that was a nice stayover music from when we were doing our Generation 9/11 program. but I always liked that tune, so I thought I'd give it another try here for Pete's program. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to A Veteran Story with Pete Mecca. I'm obviously not Pete Mecca. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit based in Pittsburgh, PA, whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Tonight, joining us will be author Christine Woods. We're going to talk to her about her book, My War. Pete will, in fact, and I'll introduce Pete here in just a minute, but I do appreciate you being here. Pete, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine. Sean, how are you?
I'm great. We're going to start off with a couple announcements as we go here. I'm going to share my screen and thank our sponsors. We've had a couple sponsors for quite a while now. And if you've been joining us for a while, you've heard the spiel, but sit back and enjoy it again, because this was written by Todd and he's a good writer. D&D, Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage. They've been really wonderful, just absolutely wonderful with us. They've supported us for quite a while. They began as a small hauling and unused auto parts operation in the Pittsburgh area in the late 1970s. They've grown to a full-service metal recycling company with 2 locations in Lawrenceville and Tarentum. D&D, they accept all types of metal, both ferrous and non-ferrous. Somebody please tell me what ferrous and non-ferrous metal is. I've been saying that for like weeks and I don't even know.
John, I think that deals with iron.
Iron?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to look it up, because now that I know they deal with that and deals with iron, I'm going to look it up.
So it could be steel versus aluminum,
okay.
Perhaps.
You know, I was in that play long time ago, play about the guy who sort of makes it big because he decides he's going to get into the junk business right after World War II, when all the metal was just strewn across Europe and they were just picking up all of the metal. But I'm sure that, you know, metal's never really gone out of style. Anyway, D&D, they accept all types of metal generated from industrial manufacturing, construction and demolition, small commercial entities, as well as individual customers. They got a wide variety of material handling equipment and are capable of managing any type of job in a timely and efficient manner, which is key. You can get quotes from them and availability at d&dautosalvage.com. Also want to thank our other sponsor, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. They've also been with us for quite a while. They are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and getting the word out about hazards and of smoking and secondhand smoke. They want people to quit. So they have classes, they got nicotine replacement therapy, they got a quit line, which is 1-800-QUIT-NOW. It's about as easy as you can remember it. They like to educate people, especially children, about tobacco use from cigars, cigarettes, easy for me to say, pipes, chew, snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. And finally, they also advocate for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can find out more about them and the programs they offer, tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. Happy to say that they came on one of the Scuttlebutt podcasts that I host through the VBC, and we had a really interesting conversation about their programs and about ways to quit. So check it out if you can. VBC Magazine. We just finished our most recent VBC Magazine, which will be the summer 2022 edition. If you do not get this magazine, it means we don't have your address. So please send us your address and you will get a free magazine in the mail. It's a wonderful magazine. It's a great way that if you haven't been able to tune in for a lot of VBC interviews, different things, we bring in those same stories into our magazine. You can read it cover to cover. It has our events. It has just a lot of really good material. I can't say enough good things about it. Brad has it back there behind his head. You can see it. I know that he likes to promote that magazine as much as possible. And, you know, we hope to get it out to more people. You can also become a member of VBC. Go to our website. Up at the top, you can see join as member. And it's $36 a year. You get not only the magazine, but you get other discounts on great things. And it also helps support the programming that we continue to bring every single week, every Monday night, and our special Thursday nights with Pete, our Tuesday nights with Glenn for Greatest Generation Live, the podcast. So many different great programs and ways to engage with us here at BBC. And I can't go another day without promoting the Scuttlebutt. If you don't know about EOD, explosive ordnance disposal, this is the episode for you. Ryan, who is there on the left, to the left of me in that picture, he's mostly my co-host. He comes on, he's an Army veteran, currently in the reserves, trying to retire, but he comes on with me to host. He brought his buddy at the bottom, David Winnie, on, who is current captain in the Army and an EOD expert tech. We talked to him about why anybody in their right mind would decide to walk up on a live bomb and try to defuse it. He had some really interesting things to say. And we talk about The Hurt Locker. If you've not seen that movie, it's a great movie, in my opinion, as a civilian. Ryan didn't really like it as an Army veteran, but David, as an EOD guy, actually really liked it. It's all about an EOD tech, this movie, but he likes to rebut what Ryan says about it. And we end up also talking about the Army's new physical fitness test, which got a lot of flack for sort of like, making it too easy on our recruits. If you can't do a knee up, a tuck up, they took that away, which, they have a good time chatting about. Scuttlebutt's a perfect opportunity for you to just download, listen to it whenever you're on your commute. So check that out. I'll put all the links in the chat. And I have a really good episode coming up next week. We have on Yuri Villanueva from Taps Across America. So this is sort of our Memorial Day episode of the Scuttlebutt. This will come out this coming Monday. Taps Across America. Yuri started this. He was a bugler in the Air Force for 23 years. And we talk about the history of taps, what taps means to him, how he was able to do that for so long in Arlington National Cemetery. Really awesome conversation coming up on Monday with Yuri. But as for tonight, we had a great conversation lined up for you with Tina Woods. Tina, I'm so happy that you were here to join us. I'm going to hand it over to Pete to introduce you, and I'll sit down in the chat. If I see some stuff pop up, you'll see my hand go up.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sean. Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Folks, this is Tina Woods. She has a remarkable book. Sean, you have a copy to show?
I do. Give me 1 second here. I'll pull that up. Pulling up this Amazon listing here. This is My War from Bismarck to Britain and Back.
Yeah, a great book. It is a collection of letters from her mother, who lost her first husband during the war, volunteered to serve with the Red Cross overseas, went to the 8th Air Force in England, and it's also a collection of her grandmother's entries into her diary. Just outstanding book. Tina, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for letting me tell my mom's story.
Okay. How and why did you begin to write this remarkable book?
Well, it really started with the letters, Pete. My mother's had, obviously, as most people did during World War II, sent a number of letters home from overseas. Unfortunately, my grandmother had carefully saved all those, as many mothers did, I'm sure, because they didn't know if that was going to be the last communication they would get from a loved one. And I knew this stack of letters existed. They were all, remember the thin airmail paper that was kind of, what did they call it? Anyway, it was glossy and super thin. And I was concerned that over time, these were going to deteriorate, and they already had started. And I never bothered to read them. Mother had told me some stories about her service during World War II, but never sat down with the letters. And so one hot Texas summer, I decided, well, I should just transcribe these so we'll have them. We'll have a record. I have a niece and a nephew and other family members, and I just thought it would be kind of important for us to know what was in those letters. And the more I transcribed them, the more I realized that Mother was an excellent historian from the standpoint of trying to share what an ordinary day was like. As you well know, and I'm sure most of our audience does too, the censors were very active. She could very rarely tell them where she was. She couldn't talk about actual actions or things that had occurred. So she tried to say, this is what a typical day is like. And she did that beautifully. And what I appreciated about writing them is that you really got a sense of what it was like. We've all read books full of facts and figures and statistics, but I had not really encountered a lot out there that gave you a sense of what it felt like to actually live through it. And she didn't want to terrify her parents, so she didn't put in a lot of scary things, but at the same time, you really get a sense of what she was doing as a 26-year-old widow over in England and in France and in the middle of war. I mean, I don't think, short of our veterans who are watching today, many 26-year-olds can really even begin to understand what war is. But it was right in their faces in real life.
Yeah, I agree with that. Your mother grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota, which meant she didn't go to the beach very much. Okay, tell us a little bit about tell us a little bit about your mother's childhood in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Sure. She grew up in Bismarck, as you said, graduated from Bismarck High School. Her father was A.M. Christensen, who was the state Supreme Court justice. They lived within walking distance of the Capitol grounds. He was an attorney. My grandparents met. My grandmother was a paralegal. And so education was really important to our family growing up, my mother's family. She went to Stevens College for her first 2 years and then finished up at the University of Iowa and graduated with a degree in theater. She was very much of a go-getter.
I graduated with a degree in theater.
Well, there you go.
Hey.
I almost did, but I switched to radio and television. But she had a fun childhood. Cash Register, who we'll talk about, who ended up being her first husband, was her brother's best friend. And he was called Pinky growing up because he had pink eye as a kid. And that was one of those monikers that just stuck. But she'd known him most of her life, and he was sort of like another brother to her. But he went off to flight school, and she encountered him in uniform, and suddenly that brother's best friend looked a lot different than the stinky Pinky that she'd grown up with. But
well, while we're on that, Tina, if you will, go ahead and tell us about your mother's first husband, Francis Cash Register. That's his nickname, Cash.
Yes.
About him becoming a fighter ace in the Pacific. Yes. And then, if you want to, you can read your grandmother's entry about his death on page 37. It's up to you.
Sure. As I said, mother had known Pinky, or we in our family referred to him as Cash because we didn't know him as Pinky, but they married shortly after he had finished his flight training in Los Angeles in February of 1942. He was North Dakota's first ace. He was at the Battle of Guadalcanal. He shot down 8 Japanese planes during that battle. Mother had always said he was a daredevil, and if he'd survived the war, he would have certainly been a test pilot because he loved pushing machines to the max. He was selected to go up to the Aleutian campaign, and it was not something that was widely shared at the time. She knew where he was going, but she couldn't tell anyone. And they had selected some of the super pilots to go up on an aircraft carrier to Alaska to fight because the Japanese were entrenched at Attu and other islands off the Aleutians in Alaska. And there he did many missions, many sorties. He had a diary also that he kept there. And one of the entries that he wrote about was how terrible the weather was and how the ceiling would drop and how rough the waves were. They were taking off of an aircraft carrier, and it was nearly impossible sometimes to get off because the water was so rough, or to land again when they finished. But it was extremely treacherous, and he ended up crashing on the island of Attu off of Holt's Bay. And for a while, Mother knew that he had been killed, but the Navy did not report him as dead. They reported him as missing. But she did know that he crashed, which was in May of 1943. So they were really only married a short period of time, a little over a year. And of that time, they were probably together a total of 4 or 5 months at the most. But to North Dakota as an ace, and was celebrated. He won the Distinguished Flying Cross and several other citations that he was given. And it was a true tragedy, of course, that he was killed so young. But there's a part.
A couple of those photos shown.
Oh, yes. Some of those probably would be good, Sean, if you can bring them up. There's some newspaper when he returned to North Dakota, and he was interviewed by NBC. It was quite a big deal, as you can imagine. And these newspaper clippings are also in the book, and you can actually read them. And Admiral Nimitz decorated him for his service in Guadalcanal.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite a person I'm always sorry that I never got to meet, but feel we know him in some ways. But when he was killed, the book is a compilation of mother's letters and then also my grandmother's war diary. And I intersperse those in chronological order. So you get my grandmother's perspective in Bismarck, North Dakota, about what it was like to be on the home front, but also what kind of information they had. I mean, we all know that America won the war, but when they were in the middle of it, my grandmother writes that she wasn't sure about whether her grandchildren would be speaking Japanese or German. Wow. There was no certainty involved in that. And so a lot of what she writes is really illuminating in terms of some of the anxiety that people felt at home, not only for their loved ones who were overseas and fighting or serving, but at the same time, what is the outcome of this going to be?
That's a fascinating perspective. Tell us about the candlelight service for those serving overseas. I think that's on page 56. Yes.
This was a service that happened in the Presbyterian Church in Bismarck. And it's my grandmother's diary entry of November 7th, 1943. 1 year since our troops landed in North Africa, and after that first brief setback, the march has been steadily toward victory. General Eisenhower has proved himself as one of the great men of our country, and our soldiers all over the world have proved themselves to be surpassed by none. Many men of outstanding knowledge and discernment feel that the war with Germany will be over by the first of the year. This was November of 1943. Italy quit early in September. Last night, Pastor Hamlin had a truly beautiful and impressive candlelight service for our boys and girls in the service. On a white rack hung in front of a huge map of the United States were candles for each one serving in this country. And as he read the names, a candle was lighted for each one. On a side table was a globe surrounded by candles for those on sea or in other lands. After all were lighted, a candelabrum with 3 candles was put on the pulpit, and Francis's name and 2 others were read, serving still but beyond the horror and the suffering. I was proud that our 2 were represented. So there were a lot of small gestures on the home front that really kept families engaged and allowed them to share some of their anxiety and their concerns with each other. And certainly House of Worship was very, very important, as it is now, to those who were at home.
When and why did your mother join the Red Cross? And tell us about her thoughts of England. Well,
when Cash was killed, Mother really didn't know what to do with herself. She was living in California. She had a friend who had joined the Red Cross and was serving over in Egypt at the time, and who had written to her and said, "This is the perfect thing for you to do, Ruth." And so she looked into it and applied and wanted to work with Navy flyers in the Pacific. And there's a whole section in the book that talks about her interview process and how quickly she was moved from one interview to the other and put on trains and had to go cross country quite literally to be interviewed. And doing a little research, I discovered why it was so obvious that she was perfect. They wanted college educated women they had to be at least 25 years old. One of the questions they asked Mother was, how many states have you been in? And she had been in probably 48 states at that point, 45. She traveled extensively. And they said, thank you very much. You need to go to the next interview. Because one of the things that was so important is that they would ask a flyer or an infantryman or a GI, whatever, well, what state are you from? And they'll say, well, I'm from Missouri. Well, I've been in Missouri. And she could realistically talk about it because she'd been there. So she was kind of like the perfect person at that time, and went right through very quickly and went to training in Washington and was pretty much shipped out to England at Christmas the following year. So it was kind of a whirlwind. And of course, the whole world was crazy at that time. So I guess it didn't seem too crazy to them, but 26 years old and a widow, and suddenly you're going overseas to do who knows what. They were meant to represent what the guys were fighting for. They were every mother, sister, girlfriend, aunt, any woman that they cared about that was back in the States. That's what those Red Cross girls, and they were very, very comfortable being called girls, represented. And having been involved in marketing and advertising most of my adult career, I mean, what a genius way to have a little bit of America on the soil where our boys were fighting. Amazing.
Oh, she was a gorgeous woman.
Yes, she was. She hated that uniform, though. I wish she had kept it. She said she had to wear it so much she was ready to burn it by the time she got home. I do have her hat, though. I have her hat.
What were her thoughts on England? How did she like England?
Well, grown up in North Dakota, you think you would be pretty used to being cold. And she wrote to her parents that she just could not warm up no matter what. She had layers of clothes. Of course, she had everything under the uniform that you could possibly allow. And very shortly after she got there, the uniform kind of went by the wayside because it was just so cold. But she was not a big fan of England. She felt a lot of sympathy for the English people. They'd been without for a long, long time. It was very hard to get what they needed. They tried to develop really good relationships with the villages where they had the aero clubs because they needed young ladies to come to dance with the enlisted men. And she tried very hard to do a lot of outreach and welcome. She had a lot of the ladies come from the village one time and come to sew patches on the uniforms of the young men and fed them coffee and donuts, of all things, which they thought were wonderful because they hadn't had sugar in years. But there was a lot of outreach to try and make the folks in the villages feel comfortable about the Americans and the people who were there, because they had been on edge for a really long time, and many felt that we entered way too late, but we did get there.
About the slit ditch narrative of your mother's first Aero Club being involved.
Yeah, I enrolled my mother in a writing class as a smart aleck young woman many, many years ago because I'd heard these stories and I told her to write them down and she never got around to it. So I actually enrolled her in a class, and some of these short stories are in the book, and this is one of them. Marge and I weren't surprised when the field phone rang a second time. A voice said, "Red alert, Ruth and Marge." Marge worked with her. She was her partner. We had been hearing airplanes overhead for several minutes and had already commented to each other, well, London must be fogged in, and once again, we're the secondary target. They were in Braintree, England. Both of us were so new at actually participating in this war that we were incapable of realizing that these events were life or death matters. I think mentally we were on some kind of a movie lot and everything would turn out happy ever after. However, with a red alert, we left our Neeson hut quarters and stepped into the driveway outside. We had closed the Red Cross Club across from us when a purple alert had been sounded, but Sergeants Walsh and Edwards were standing at the doorway of the club. Suddenly, everything was as bright as day as our entire airfield was bathed in brilliant light from innumerable flares that were gently floating down around us. Sergeant Walsh commented that usually flares were followed by bombs, and we all better get to the slit ditches, the only protection available. We do such mundane things in the midst of a crisis. Suddenly, I found myself sputtering and spitting and saying to Marge, "I've got a mouthful of dirt." Not, "Are you okay, Marge?" or "What happened?" Both of us were lying on our stomachs, covered with dirt, cement, and debris. 2 inches from my head was a piece of concrete about 6 by 6 feet. In front of us was total devastation where the once 60-foot Nissen Hut Red Cross Club had stood, and you're seeing a picture of it right now. Somehow we both knew that there was no reason to call out to Sergeants Walsh and Edwards. They were almost in the exact spot where the bomb had landed. There must have been a great deal of noise with the world erupting around us, but I can't remember a sound. Me, who holds her ears when I know someone is going to pop a balloon because I can't stand sharp sounds. 2 thoughts flashed into my mind. First, the Red Cross supervisor saying, "Ruth, we're sending you to an airfield that is the target of frequent bombing attacks, but we believe you can handle it." And second, what in God's name am I doing here? She had only been at that base a short period of time too. And can you imagine? I mean, suddenly the war was right on her doorstep and it became very real in a hurry.
I'm sure it did. I have down here, tell us about a red alert. I think you just did, but about a night bombing on page 104.
Yeah, she had actually been there about a month after their Red Cross Club had been bombed. So she was, this explains what she did now that she was initiated into the war. "I groped for the field phone with its guiding, demanding ring. 1 a.m. finds me mentally fuzzy until a detached voice pronounces red alert. Drowsiness vanishes as my feet plunge into oversized flying boots, first traveling the tunnels of fleece-lined trousers. I fumble for the black suspenders that hold up my size 40 pants. Dash for the door of the Quonset hut. I snatch my leather flight jacket and steel helmet. Outside, I'm clothed in lovely, flickering, innocent white light, but my senses telegraph the message, run. Those are flares falling around you, and the bombs will be next. Shivering from fear and cold, I contemplate the idiocy of war. Here I am in a 3 by 6 foot hole in the ground called a slit ditch. This serves as my sanctuary from danger, my bed and grandstand seat for bombing raids. Home is a P-47 fighter base in England located on the outskirts of a town with the unlikely name of Braintree. Practically every other night, I play fireman by jumping into clothes laid out on the floor in such a manner that 60 seconds is tops for total dressing time. Leather and fleece surround my 5'3" frame. Remember, she said size 40 pants. So can you imagine? I resemble a teddy bear with a steel helmet balancing precariously on my ears. They had the famous midnight requisition. So if any Red Cross girl said, "I'm freezing," suddenly a flight jacket would show up on her doorstep. I mean, all these things just mysteriously appeared to keep her warm. The sound of planes overhead interrupts my thoughts. London must be fogged in tonight, so ours on the neighboring airfield is the secondary target. The flares are all around us and the entire area is bright as day. At last, the carbon arc searchlights are piercing the sky, trying to determine what aircraft are above us. Suddenly, a searchlight catches a plane. It's a German Me-109. Minutes before this, I could hear low murmur of voices from the surrounding slit ditches. But now everyone is yelling directions. "Don't lose him. A little to the right. He's getting away from you. Get more spots on that plane." The plane and the lights play hide and seek overhead. But now we have 2 planes bathed in light. Our airfield erupts with a cheer. The other plane is a British night fighter on the tail of the German bomber. I can see the flashes from the tracer bullets. The dance of kill or be killed is playing before my eyes, accompanied by a chorus of 2,000 voices, mine included, shouting, "Get that SOB, kill him, kill him." If I closed my eyes, I would swear this was nothing but a football game. The excitement, the suspense, and cheering are all here, except this time life is the football. Smoke is coming from the tail of the German plane. He's been hit. I count 3 parachutes floating in the eerie light. Score 3 for our side. Tomorrow night, I might get to sleep all night. Hopefully, London will be free of fog.
That's a great narrative from a lady. I love it. You know, one of my favorite parts of your book is the story of the mission.
Oh, yeah.
Due to the graphic nature and the real horrors of war. Tell us about that mission. I think that's on 165.
It is. Mother had now moved. This was in August of 1944, and she was now at North Pickenham on an air base with the 492nd Bomb Group. These were B-52 heavy bombers that were going into Germany.
B-17s probably.
There were some 17s, but a lot of them,
B-24s,
24s, yes, yeah, sorry.
All right.
Those are some of the battle clothes she wore, and the other picture is she was able to get a true Scottish kilt. She was so happy to get out of uniform. Okay, so here's the mission. Ruth, control tower here. The mission will be returning in 15 minutes. This is a rough one, so be prepared. The phone ringing at 4 a.m. always puts my feet on the floor with all my senses on the alert. By now, with 5 months of service as an American Red Cross girl on a bomber base in England, calls at any hour meant 1 or more missions is airborne. Munich, Germany, or farther must be our target this time. Early morning phone calls signal 6 or 8 hours flight time, and that meant deep into Germany. Every time I build a coke fire under these ancient English 40-gallon clay vats, I long for an American electric coffee maker. However, I can certainly struggle with ridiculous equipment if I can ease the pressure and anxiety of 120 air-weary flyers, 10 per plane. As a Red Cross girl, I met all returning missions. The Air Force found that debriefing after a mission was much more successful and accurate if the flying crews had a period of relaxation first. Food and conversation served by an American girl worked the magic. So off I go to the kitchen to make gallons of coffee and sandwiches for 120 weary and hungry crewmen. And she was the only Red Cross girl on that base. So you can imagine. I mustn't forget to add a new candle to my scotch bottle. What for? To light all those forbidden while flying cigarettes. It's easier to light a cigarette by a candle rather than fumble with shaking hands to fire a match. 1 candle for every mission. By now, no glass on the bottle is visible due to all the layers of wax. My mind refuses to dwell on the many lives all that wax represents. Too painful, I guess. Arriving in my Jeep to the airstrip, I recall the words rough mission. That means we've lost some bombers or have wounded on board. Some will be low or out of gas and forced to crash land in southern England. Every mission I sat on a high mound of dirt about a block from the central tower. Today I gather 12 stones, 1 for each bomber. As each plane lands, I drop a stone. Hopefully all 12 stones will fall today. I can see 3 planes on the horizon in formation. Good, 3 are safe. The next formation is not in position. The lead plane is falling back. The other 2 are not circling the field in a holding position. They're coming directly into the landing path. Plane 1 has 2 engines feathered. Plane 2 has just dropped 3 red flares, meaning 3 wounded aboard. Suddenly, it is very clear that both of them are going to land, one on top of the other. I was hoping I wouldn't do this.
Okay, it's understandable.
That's okay. Plane 2 has wounded aboard and has priority, but plane 1 is out of gas. I hear a voice screaming, "No, no, no, it's mine." I'm convinced that if I scream loud enough, they will hear me. I am yelling instructions. Plane 2, pull up, pull up, pull up. Everything in slow motion with 20 lives in the balance. To be a spectator helplessly watching 20 men's lives hang the balance is terrifying. It seems like forever before the last 15 feet and impact. The top plane flies into the tail of the bottom plane, which plunges nose down and crashes in an enormous black and fiery ball. Plane 1 is still airborne, fighting like a wounded bird trying to fly. Another eternity of slow motion. The bruised plane plummets down belly first, then slowly, the plane breaks apart in sections. It's as though an unseen hand had pulled every rivet out of it all at once. Figures come tumbling out and running in every direction. 9 I counted. The tail gunner didn't make it. Tomorrow I'll meet another mission. I almost got through it, Pete.
That's okay. That's all right. That's an outstanding account of what those boys went through and when they come back.
It's vivid.
Yeah. How did your mother, Ruth, your mother's name is Ruth, meet your father?
Well, she lived through VE Day and ended up catching pneumonia and was in the hospital for several weeks, and they sent her down to the Riviera for R&R. And
French Riviera?
Yes. And it was an amazing time to be there. You know, the war had just ended. Romance was in the air. Everybody was giddy. You only had first names. The soldiers didn't wear uniforms, so you didn't know who was what rank or anything. It was just a time to just let go of everything, all the tension and stress and the pain that they'd experienced. And so she met my dad at a dance and listened to his Southern drawl and went, oh my gosh, he's a Southerner.
That's my boy.
I know. And he was supposed to ship out the next day, and they were supposed to have a date, and they got confused and they missed each other. He went to her room to pick her up, and she was sitting in the lobby of the hotel waiting for him to come and get her out of the lobby. But it ended up that he didn't ship out. That's my dad at Camp Blanding where he trained. You can kind of see him in the middle there. And so he called her and said, well, we didn't leave. We couldn't leave. I'm going to be here another night. Can I see you? And so this happened about 4 times. And then he had to go back to Germany. He was in the 30th Infantry Division, and they were doing all the cleanup after the war. And he knew that mother was from Bismarck, North Dakota, and that her dad had been Supreme Court Justice. So he kind of had a good beat on where he might find her again. And they were going to meet in Paris for Christmas, and mother had an opportunity to go home. And so she did, and just kind of said, well, that's that. It was a nice fling, and he was a great guy, but I'll probably never see him again. And, you know, life goes on after what she'd been through. But my dad did find her when he came home and went to North Dakota and visited her and her parents. And they were not quite sure whether this Southerner was going to make the cut or not. But he did finally. And my brother and I are here to prove it. And it was a very happy marriage for the two of them. We fought the Civil War frequently, but that was okay. She learned to cook some Southern food, but not quite what my father appreciated. But they were married until he passed away in 1994. Yeah.
From your grandmother's diary at Christmas, No Peace on Earth, page 201.
Yes. And this was December 15th of 1944. We're going to go back a little bit. The war was still raging. She wrote, I believe I said I wasn't going to write about the war. I'd leave that to more eloquent people. But how can I help it when our hearts are so heavy all the time? When we see the young lives shadowed all around us by the bitter separation and the deaths too. Of course, Francis is the only one gone of our immediate family. But when I see poor Betty being so brave and cheerful, and to think of Tilly not being able to share with her husband the joy of a little son, and Mark away from the baby he worships, and Ruth deprived of everything a girl should have, my heart is sick. And there is no faintest hope of it being over soon. Always in the background of my mind is the thought of the misery and suffering and hardship of our boys in France, in China, in India, and the South Pacific, and in prison camps the world over. Even God seems to have forgotten us in what we so firmly believe to be a righteous cause. Not in half a century has the weather been so bad in Europe. Mud so the tanks can't go, clouds and fog and snow so the planes can't fly. Never since I can remember has there ever been so little peace on earth, goodwill to men. It kind of gives you an insight of the true anxiety that people had at home. When will this be over? When will our lives go back to normal? When will our loved ones come home? How are we going to live without the loved ones who are never coming home?
That was beautiful. I love that. Now, that's from your grandmother's diary. Tell us about her entry about Victory in Europe Day. And your mother's letter about POWs. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, it really is. Because, we think about the pictures we see from Life magazine and everybody going crazy. But when you were living it, it wasn't exactly that way. This is written on May 8th, 1945. She writes AM. My grandfather was AM Christensen, and she called him AM. AM and I got up at 7 this morning to hear President Truman's brief address announcing that the war in Europe is over, and now on to the next step, Japan. It is heartbreaking to think of all the men who will not come home, but go on to another hell. And heartbreaking too for the families of those and the others who will never come home. How can anyone think of celebrating? The president had proclaimed May 13th, Mother's Day, as a day of prayer and thanksgiving for this victory, and urges all of whatever creed to go to church and pray. The tales of atrocities are blood-chilling and authentic this time. The dreadful thing is that the German people really seem to believe that the suffering of other people is of no account. After signing the surrender agreement, the German officials pleaded for generosity toward the German people because they have suffered more than anyone else. If it were not so tragic, it would be funny. How in this superior race complex ever to be eradicated from minds so poisoned? A picture in Life magazine showing simply unbelievable horrors shows a small boy strolling down a road lined with thousands of dead bodies near one of the prisons, seemingly unaffected by the horrible sight. It was not a celebration, and they were just, they had learned of the horrors of the Holocaust, and yet the German people had suffered more than anyone else. And then my mom writes, she was in Beaumont, France at this point, and her letter's dated May 10th, 1945. Dearest Mother and Daddy, so that day of peace has finally come. I haven't done one bit of celebrating. Somehow all I can do is say, thank God it's over here. In fact, it's been rather depressing thinking of all the good guys who aren't here to help celebrate. The war really seems to be in our backyard here. For the past 4 days, really swamped with freed POWs. They are flying them to England from our field. All of them are British subjects. We've all talked to them, and some have been prisoners since Dunkirk. Imagine. All in all, they appear fairly healthy, but then we don't see the hospital cases at all. They've been going through here by the trainload. All of the French in this village have been feeding them eggs and whatever they can find. Our kitchen is practically a short order house for fried eggs. Makes me wish I had something more to feed them besides coffee and those damn donuts. VE Day was celebrated very strangely here. Nothing to make noise with except the church bell and the air raid siren. The siren has been going practically every hour, and it makes me jump. I keep thinking a plane has crashed on the field. For 2 nights, everyone and his brother shot airplane flares at night. The sky looked just like the 4th of July. Really was quite a display. Everyone that possibly good got stinking for Lincoln, meaning drunk. Guess they had been saving bottles of cognac for months. Anyway, we did a land office business in coffee as a sobering up service. But it's really interesting she writes also during D-Day, they didn't know D-Day was happening. They had just had requisitions for food, sandwiches after sandwiches after sandwiches. And she kept saying, why are we making all these sandwiches? And one of the GIs said to her, Ruth, it's D-Day. They didn't even know on her base that that was what was happening. So, you know, we have different ideas, I guess, about how you would celebrate that moment, but living it was quite a different thing.
It sounds like it. Did you know very much about your mother's participation in World War II before finding her letters?
I'd kind of grown up with stories. She told us all the funny stories. There's one in the book about one of the guys flying in with lemons, fresh lemons. They had no fresh citrus for months and wanting lemon pies. And so she and her buddy Marge said, well, we're going to make lemon meringue pies. And so they got a midnight requisition of eggs, which were hard to come by, and then realized they had no pie tins. And so they went down to the machine shop and one of the guys made them pie tins. So she told us stories like that. I really had not heard many of the hair-raising stories that she later wrote about. But when I started putting this book together, I started interviewing her. I was living in California for part of that time. And whenever I would fly home for a little bit when I was doing cross-country work, I would interview her because a lot of her letters either had things blacked out or she just didn't write certain things because her parents would have been terrified for her. So I've been able to incorporate a lot of what those things were in between, reading between the lines, so to speak. So yeah, I had known about her service and I just really felt it would be important to preserve it somehow for our family, and was really blessed to be able to get the book put together and to be able to do it in her lifetime. So she got the accolades of her story, which was wonderful.
That's outstanding. My next question was, were you able to discuss the letters with your mother? But you've already answered that. And it's so nice that you were able to do that. Let me ask you this, and maybe you've already answered, but what do you think the Red Cross was really trying to achieve by sending American women overseas?
Well, a little piece of home. You know, one of the things she writes about and that she throughout the book, she's asking her parents to send her things. And one of them was perfume. Those Red Cross girls, there were like 7,000 of them that were deployed to all the war fronts during World War II. They did different things besides just the aero clubs that Mother ran. They were at the USO. They ran the rest homes for R&R so that when men came off the field, they had a place to go. And then they were the donut dollies that we all know about. But she said many times that she represented sisters, mothers, wives, girlfriends. An American female on foreign soil was just that touch of home for all the soldiers, all the pilots, all the folks that were fighting. They could talk about home. This is a shot of Mother. She did take donuts out to the airstrips in her Jeep. She didn't drive the donut mobile, thank heavens, but she did have a machine on one of the bases that made 400 donuts an hour. And she would load up her Jeep with coffee and donuts, especially when missions were coming in, and they'd be gone in like an hour's time. So they were that little touch of home and that remembrance of this is why we're here and this is what we're fighting for, which, you know, is genius from a marketing standpoint. I don't know that was their ultimate goal, but that's how it turned out. And it was a great morale builder for all those guys.
400 donuts an hour, that would feed a police precinct, wouldn't it? All right,
I guess they weren't very good donuts, though.
You've answered my next
hated those things.
What other services did the Red Cross people do? They did a lot, but
Yeah.
you attended. She was assigned to the 492nd Bomb Group, and you attended those reunions with your mom, I think.
Yes, we were able to go to some of those. It was amazing.
Reunions?
Pardon?
What was it like to go to the reunions?
Oh, it was fantastic. In fact, the story of the mission, the first one that we attended was in Arlington, Texas, just near Dallas. And there was a room with memorabilia in it. And we've been told to bring some pictures and things, and we did. And Mother was 85 at the time and really kind of anxious about, do I belong here? I'm not a veteran, etc. But we went anyway. And she was just treated like a celebrity. It was great. These guys just couldn't believe a Red Cross girl at 85 had come to their reunion. Many of them remembered Mother, which is quite remarkable, I think. And we went into the memorabilia room, and one of the tables had pictures of a plane crash. And would you believe the plane that was behind those two planes that landed on top of each other? He was a tail gunner, and he had snapped a photograph right as their plane took off to avoid the crash. And there were pictures of that crash that Mother wrote about. Amazing. But the guys were great. You just saw the years fall away. They would sit and talk and tell stories. And it was just a privilege to be able to be there and listen to them and get to know them. They were great.
Sorry, my dogs are barking in the background. I bet your mother had a ball.
She did. She did. She was treated like a queen, which was appropriate.
What other books or authors have you encountered about the 492nd Bomb Group that might be of interest?
There's several, actually. And in fact, the way we got connected is Brian Mahoney, whose father, Jim Mahoney, was the CEO of the 492nd, had found his dad's memoirs and had made a book of them. And his father wrote a whole chapter about Mother and what she had done. And so he wanted to follow up and verify that this information was real. And he knew one of the pilots that had been in the 492nd that had also known Mother, and he contacted him to see, do you remember what her maiden name was? Anyway, long story short, he lived in Mecca. My mother lived in Jacksonville, Florida. He contacted my uncle because he knew he'd started the Bismarck Zoo, and his last name was Christensen. And that sort of connected us. So Brian's book is Reluctant Witness. These are all on Amazon, by the way. Excellent read. The 492nd was the hard luck crew. They lost more planes than anyone, more bombers than anyone. Fortunes of War, Alan Blue wrote. This is out of print, but you might be able to find it on eBay. This tells the whole 492nd story. Just incredible what they did. And then Charles Bastine, 32 co-pilots. He was also part of the 492nd group. We got to know him. He remembered Mother very well. She kind of palled around with groups of guys. And so his crew was the BTOers, big time operators. And so she was very close to them. And I got to meet him and his wife and his daughter, and several of us second generation group are part of the Heritage League, which are the descendants of the 8th Air Force veterans. And so we were really active for a while with 492nd Bomb Group and attended as many reunions as we could. It was just fabulous.
Where can people find your book to purchase?
My book is on Amazon. And if you search, be sure to put in My War from Bismarck. That's all you need to put in. And I think Sean had put up the link a little while ago. If you just put in My War, you'll get Andy Rooney's book, which is not mine, which it was. But if you put From Bismarck, then you'll see it.
I'll tell you, I read it. It's just a great narrative of World War II from the people who were there to witness it. And then, oh, there we go. Tell the folks about this shot right here.
Well, when the war was over, there were still a lot of things going on and people couldn't go home right away. And one afternoon, she was grabbed by another Red Cross girl saying, "You've got to be a witness for a wedding." And she's like, "Whose wedding?" And the other Red Cross girl said, "I don't know, but come on, we've got to go." So they ran to this little church in France, and here's the bride and here's the groom. And she stood up with them, and this is them coming out of the church. And she remembers signing, she didn't even know the groom's last name, but you made hay while the sun shone, and the war was over, and this couple was wanted to get married because they wanted to be able to go home together. So it was a quickie wedding, and they threw it together pretty quick, but she loved the picture of them walking under the sabers, and that was the bridal march at that point in time.
That's your mother behind the bride, is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, looks like her.
It probably is. I can't see without my glasses.
Oh,
Yeah, there she is. There's the bride and the groom, and
that's your mother right here.
yeah, over on the far. Yeah, Sean's got it. That's her.
This is a tall gentleman over here. I bet he played basketball.
Yeah. He's kind
He
of
wasn't a fighter pilot. I can tell you
proud.
that. He wasn't a fighter pilot.
Probably not.
Well, the short guys were the fighter pilots because the tall guys couldn't fit into the cockpits.
Oh, and it was brutal to fly those planes. Sitting and listening to the veterans with the 492nd, I had no idea. I mean, Mother writes about making coffee and sandwiches, but they couldn't eat anything before they went because, there was no place for them to get rid of anything they might have eaten. It was freezing cold. The planes were not pressurized. They would lose their fillings because they would be so cold that their teeth would, freeze. It was terrible. I never realized the physical hardships that they had, much less flying over to Germany and, hoping you can find your target, hoping you can drop your bombs, and hoping you can get home. I mean, 8 hours of sheer terror was just unbelievable. And I had really never heard those kinds of stories until I had the chance to sit around with some of those veterans. And it was good that they were all in their 20s. I mean, anybody older probably physically would not have been able to do what they did.
Well, percentage-wise, not percentage-wise, the casualty rate for the war over Europe was the highest, 80,000 airman casualties, and 26,000 were deaths. So one hell of an air war. Sean, you want to open this up for questions? What a remarkable book. What a remarkable story. You do a great job.
She's quite a lady.
Yeah, your mother was quite a lady, and you are too.
Well, thank you.
Rick's mentioned a bit earlier that his mother was a Red Cross ambulance driver in Washington, D.C. during World War II. Wow. Rick, do you want to chime in about her experiences on the home front?
Yeah, she was a volunteer for the Washington or DC chapter. And basically, I just recall she said she transported the actor Robert Taylor and the renowned Jimmy Doolittle from Bowling Airfield over to Walter Reed so they could visit the wounded.
Wow.
It's basically it that I can recall at this moment.
Yeah, they served all over the place. There were many that were stateside that did a lot of that kind of work as well. One of the things I read is that said of the 7,000 women that were enrolled in the Red Cross who enlisted, volunteered for the Red Cross, they had the highest casualties of any other female group, or the Waves or the WACs or what have you, in World War II. And most of those were the donut dollies who were out very close to the fighting lines. So it was an amazing time.
We like 1 or 2 miles behind the lines sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Tina, we have a Navy Wave here on the program with us. Julia Parsons is 101 and lives here in Pittsburgh with us.
Wow.
Yeah. Julia, if you want to wave, how are you doing tonight?
Where are you, Julia?
He's with
How
us.
wonderful.
Just might need to press here. There you are, Julia.
I had two friends who were Red Cross women during the war, and they had similar stories.
Mm-hmm.
But they all loved it.
Well, have you written your story down? I bet you have an amazing story.
Well, I'm not a writer as such. So
We've featured Julia. She's been featured on many different programs. She helped to crack the Enigma code.
Oh my goodness. Oh, well, I hope you've saved all those interviews, Sean. What a treasure.
Definitely.
Oh, gosh.
Certainly.
That's fantastic. Thank you for your service. Oh my goodness.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I loved it. I loved being in the service. Probably the highlight of my life.
She's heading to Washington. She's been invited to the Memorial Day parade.
All
Oh,
right.
fantastic. How wonderful. Oh goodness.
So, yeah, I asked what hotel we would be in, and she said, well, the security is working on that. We're not telling anybody now. I said, it's bad enough with my age and infirmities and worried about the COVID also. And now I've got to worry about security.
Oh, well, I think you will be very well protected, as you should be. You are a national treasure.
Well, I don't know about that, but
yes, you are. Oh my goodness. How wonderful you'll get to go. That's fantastic.
Yes, I was really, really amazed. I don't know where she got my name. Just ran across it somewhere, I guess. I thought it was Todd who had done this, but he said he had nothing to do with it. So
If he did, he wouldn't tell you.
Yeah.
oh, that's probably true too.
Yeah, he probably had a hand there somewhere.
Julia
could be.
Julia has shared her experiences with many groups, particularly high school students who thoroughly enjoy it.
Oh, good. Mother did a little bit of that when she was able to. And it's so hard, I think, for kids to just really even connect with what that is like. But thank goodness you shared your experience. That's just amazing. I would love to hear it myself. I'll have to look at the archive, Sean.
Yes, we do have it in our archives, and even if you just Google Julia Parsons, you'll come across her many interviews. But I can certainly send you the link of our interview with Julia. Brad, you have your hand up.
Well, thank you. Hi, Tina. Good to have you with us tonight. You think in a book you can't put everything in, and it's tough to create the story and get it printed. Is there anything that you think your mom did not want in the book or wanted in the book that's not there? Any stories or reflections that did not make it for whatever reason?
Well, there are some, absolutely. I remember she was visiting me once here in Texas, and we were kind of getting down to the wire to get the book ready to go to the publisher. And I said, Mom, what did it feel like to meet a mission? And, I said, can you think about it? Can you write down, because we really want to know what it felt like. And I came home and I found her in tears, even after all this time. And she just said some things are just too hard to remember, but I think she really meant some things are just too hard to forget. And some of that pain was so real, even after all those years. And then I felt horrible. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't want to upset you, but she was very forthright and forthcoming with her war experiences where my dad was not at all. And I tried those out of him, and he just flatly refused. And I'll always be sorry I don't have those. But there are some things I'm sure that she just didn't want to go there again. It was just too painful. She didn't really talk a lot about what it felt like to be a widow at that time, because there were so many widows everywhere. But she grew up with Cash, Pinky, Francis, pick a name. And that had to be completely devastating to have said goodbye and not knowing whether he was going to come back. And he didn't, as our veteran families and our current service members and their families experience on a daily basis. That was still very painful for her, I think.
Met so many veterans who do not want to talk about their experiences.
Yeah.
And I do tell them, at least tell your kids or your grandkids where you were, what branch of service, and maybe what unit you were in, and they can Google it and pretty well find out what you did. But it breaks my heart for my fellow veterans not to discuss it at least a little bit, to get it off their chest. And some of them can't do it. I understand that. I've had guys walk out of the interview 3 times to collect themselves. And once they got off their chest, one lady called me and said, "Thank you. My husband is a changed man. He got it off his chest. He's entirely different." So it's up to the individual, but I still would like for guys to let their parents, not the parents, but their family at least know where they were. And really the kids will find out what their daddy did or the mother.
Yeah. That's so true. It is so true. My dad got a Bronze Star, and we got the citation for his Bronze Star, but not really many stories at all about what his experience was like. And he was at the Battle of the Bulge and Band of Brothers. I mean, he was there. That's what he did.
Wow.
So yeah, it's amazing.
Fascinating. I loved your book.
Thank you.
It's a whole different direction from World War II. You don't find many books like that, telling it from a Donut Dolly's point of view, a Red Cross survivor's point of view. It's usually the blood and guts of war, and your mother saw it, but from a different perspective. And some of her letters were just outstanding. I wish I could write as good as your mother. She did good. Yeah, pretty.
She was a wonderful writer. That was my parents on their honeymoon. And it was really kind of funny. I interviewed her a lot. The later sections of the book talk about their relationship, and she was very frank about saying that there weren't very many men left after the war, and if you found somebody you had some chemistry with and that you thought you could get along with, you better marry him, because they just weren't falling off turnip trucks. That was so funny. My dad had passed away by the time we actually published this, and she was pretty straightforward about it. She was 26 years old. All her friends who had stayed home were having families, and here she wasn't married, and she had bumped into this crazy Southerner, and by golly, she decided she was going to make a life with him, and she did. Thank goodness. I wouldn't be here if she hadn't, or my brother. But it was just an amazing time. What an experience. As I'm sure you know, Julia, you lived it too.
Yes, and we so envied you, the Red Cross girls, because they could go overseas and we weren't allowed to. We were strictly land. Waves were not permitted out of the country. So
they were too worried about what might happen to y'all, I'm sure.
I have no idea. That was just one of the rules. The Red Cross people did travel, and they had amazing stories, just like your mother's. Just amazing things. They got to see the world in the raw, I guess is what you would call it.
Yeah.
Far different.
Point.
It was quite an amazing, profound experience for her, certainly. She had every kind of living condition you could imagine, from bombed out farmhouses to Quonset huts to tiny little rooms with no heat and a bed and a chair, and trying to make something out of nothing. I mean, that was her favorite phrase, because she had to, with the clubs that she ran, she had to make sandwiches. She had to come up with food. She had to come up with dances and card games and you name it, anything to get the guys' minds off what they would have to do tomorrow or the day after that or the day after that, or maybe what they've just come through. And for many years here in our community, I ran our senior center, and I always thought it was the great karma wheel, because I was doing the same thing for the same people, only in their senior years, that Mother had done in her 20s. So it's really a privilege to help serve the greatest generation and thank them for everything that they did for us and continue to do, clearly.
I've heard so many of the World War II generations say that, like the book says, it was the worst of times and the best of times.
Yeah.
War is a horrible
About
thing,
right.
but I can look back on Vietnam and try to avoid some things, but yet, just like Brad, you can remember the good things too. And you have to laugh about them. And the greatest generation, we're not going to see their likes again.
No, absolutely not.
Like one man said, there will be no veterans in World War III.
That's about right.
Did you just have your hand up, or did you take your hand out?
I don't know much about the Red Cross workers. Did they receive pay, and did they receive hazardous duty pay, and are they eligible for any benefits, veteran benefits? It sounds like PSTD could be a common problem, but I'm not familiar with Red Cross and how they were compensated or treated, and how they were brought back into the fold peacetime.
Yeah, they were paid a stipend. They really didn't have anything. My mother writes about not having anything to spend her money on, so she just had it sent home to her parents. Anything they needed, they got via midnight requisition. You know? But one of the things that she writes in the book, one of the stories she tells is when she was clearing Red Cross, and she discovered that they really did not have a record of her service when she was getting ready to exit and go home. And she was livid. She was absolutely furious. And one of the guys sat her down, one of the administrators sat her down and apologized profusely, but they said, you know, Ruth, we were fighting a war. You know, we weren't really very concerned with keeping track of hours that Red Cross girls were working. This was, you know, no computers, everything was done by hand, typewriters, you know. It's a miracle that they did have the communications they did, but she got a small stipend. I don't think it actually says in the book what it was, but she just sent it home to her parents and told them to put it in a savings account for her. And if she needed any money, she had some PIN money, but they were provided all their meals. They were provided all their housing. She didn't really have time to shop. She writes about being in Paris and just drooling over the fashions and the hats and everything, and not really having a chance to buy anything, because what could you do with it? You had to carry everything in a duffel bag, and if you were lucky, a Foot Locker. So there was very little that she got to bring home, and most of that she got rid of because it was uniforms and dirty clothes that she'd been washing out of her helmet. So it was definitely not a glamorous life. They did get paid something. They volunteered for duty, but she did say that if they were captured, they were to be treated at the rank of a captain. But fortunately, that didn't happen to her. I don't know about others. I'm sure there were some that were captured.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Amazing time.
But does she get veterans privileges? Is there any
No.
Nothing?
No, they did not. She was able to, years later, my brother did a little research, and because Cash, her first husband, had passed away so early, there was some Navy benefit that she could apply for. So she got, I think it was a few $100s a month, well into her late 80s, when we realized that that was a possibility for her. But as a Red Cross worker, field service worker, they didn't get any benefits when they came back because they were attached, but they weren't actual service veterans, so to speak.
Well,
Yeah. But she did okay.
I'm sure.
Yeah, she did.
Did she work as a civilian? Did she work then, or?
Well, she tried, but my father, being the dear Southerner that he was, and his generation, felt that if your wife worked, that meant you weren't a good provider. So she did tons of volunteer work and kept herself extremely busy. But she worked for a little while before she became pregnant with my brother. But once she was able to be a stay-at-home mom for us, which certainly I'm grateful for. But in the later years, she did odd jobs here and there, and she would have been a fabulous employee to have, because she was so conscientious and worked so hard. But she ended up doing that for us, for my brother and I, and I'm grateful that she did. You know, she kept a great house and made sure we always had what we needed. So even when there really wasn't much money to do that.
Can you center on this, Sean?
If you talk, Pete, you'll be centered. Go ahead.
Okay. That's
Ernie Harr's group. Yeah.
Okay,
Umbriago.
Pilot. Aviator that your mother visited. You want to tell us about that story?
Well, yes. Ernie Harr was a pilot in the 492nd Bomb Group. He was one of the lucky ones to survive all of his missions. And he was supposed to go home stateside, and they asked if he would stay and train some of the newer pilots coming in. And so he did, and he was a flight instructor, and ended up crashing. The student crashed the plane. Ernie survived, the student did not, but he was really badly burned. And because Mother had known him with the 492nd, when she heard that his plane had crashed and he was badly burned, she went to see him in the hospital, and went to see him several times, and wrote about taking him a little Christmas tree at Christmas. And he was a special guy, and she was very special to him. But he was engaged and was going home to marry his fiance, which he did. And Mother kind of lost track of him. And then when Brian Mahoney, his father's book, Ernie Harr was the person that he contacted because he remembered Mother so well. And he was the thread that got Brian to my uncle to then Mother. And so we had the joy of meeting Ernie at the 492nd Bomb Group reunions. And because he lived in Melbourne, Florida, and Mother lived in Jacksonville, he would come up frequently and spend the afternoon. My brother and I got to know him well, and he was just a fabulous gentleman. We just loved him, and he was widowed at that point in time, and we just thought it'd be wonderful if they got together. And Mother was like, "I can't lose another one. He'll just be a friend," which my brother and I were very dashed about, but in the long run, it turned out fine. It was better that way. Mother ended up with aphasia, a form of dementia that inhibited her ability to speak. And in the last years of her life, she really couldn't speak at all. So it would have been Ernie who would have had to live through losing her, but losing her to dementia, which is a horrible, horrible disease. So, but we kept in touch, and he passed away, I think it was about a year and a half ago in February. So he lived well into his 90s, and just a fabulous gentleman. It was just great.
Pete, you're muted.
Okay. You mentioned that student pilot was killed when the plane crashed. I think a lot of folks don't know that in the continental United States during World War II, we lost 18,000 pilot trainees in training.
Really?
18,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. There was a lot of flight training in the San Antonio area, and they've got quite a nice museum at Stinson Field that talks about many of the 492nd Bomb Group pilots and navigators and crewmen came through San Antonio before they shipped overseas. And yeah, they didn't have a great deal of time to learn what they were doing. It was a lot of by the seat of your pants, and those planes were not very forgiving if you made a mistake.
No, especially the B-24s. A B-24 flew into Peachtree City Airport several years ago, and I got to talk to the pilot, and I heard they were difficult to fly. And I said, what is it like to fly a B-24? He said, it's like driving an 18-wheeler with 18 flat tires.
Uh,
But, I got all in that bomber. That was a good bomber. It was very good. What a fascinating time that was. I interviewed a gentleman who was a British pilot during the war, a bomber pilot, then a fighter pilot. And a lot of people don't know this, but the British fighter pilots trained in Georgia, in the United States before the war.
Really?
In south of Georgia. Yes, they did. And what a fascinating story of that guy trying to adapt to the Southern way of life. He walked into I don't know if it was Walgreens or Rexall or what, but it was one of those, they had the counter, you know, the dinner counters, and or what do they call it back then? Soda counters, soda jerks. I forgot what they call it.
Soda fountains.
On the board, and they had something called a banana split. And he said, I had no idea what that was, but I ordered one. And he said, they brought that banana split out and put it in front of me. And I looked at it, and he said, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. What'd you think of Southern cooking? He said, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. He was 93 at the time. And he said, I still love Southern cooking. I said, what about fried okra? He said, hey, give me some more time on that one.
That's an acquired taste, I think. Yeah, probably.
So, any more questions for this remarkable lady?
I don't see her any in the chat unless anybody wants to chime in.
Okay. Well, Tina, this has been one of the most interesting interviews I have ever conducted. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
On your book, and I hope we sell you 1 million copies.
Well, I'm just thrilled to be able to share Mother's story. You know, it is one of those untold stories. There are 1 million of them out there, and I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to share it with you and to have had the opportunity to get it down in writing, because, you know, as we lose these wonderful people, their stories are lost with them. So, yes. Julia, do more interviews.
Your mother will always be there.
That's right. That's right. Exactly right.
Well, God bless everybody. Thanks for joining us. I hope next month we're going to have a Air Force pilot who was shot down over North Vietnam. He served about 5 years in Hanoi Hilton. We're trying to work that out now. So, and Tina, please join us next month. We'd love to have you back.
Sure, it'd be fun. Thank you. I'll tune in.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful evening.
Job,
Thank you,
Sean.
Pete.
All right.
Thank you,
We'll
Sean.
see you all Monday night.